I remember the click of the door behind me more than the words spoken inside that windowless classroom. The walls trembled with the muffled clatter of pots from the cafeteria, but the rejection committee sat as still as marble statues. Three of them in a semicircle with notebooks positioned like barriers between us. The oldest professor, a thin man with a neat white beard, cleared his throat. "Senor Romero," he said, voice formal and cold, "your proposal is unconventional." My hands fisted under the table where they couldn't see. I'd spent months cooking in my grandmother's kitchen, testing recipes, borrowing books. I arrived with trembling hope. They leafed through my submission, the handwritten pages already smudged with oil and ink. "It is she," I said. I knew my pulse was visible in my neck, but I met his gaze. "But it is honest cooking, Argentine at its roots." The younger professor, a woman with severe eyebrows, barely looked at me. "We asked for fusion, for molecular gastronomy, for vision. You wrote about empanadas and stews." "These are our roots," I replied, softer, because the heat in my chest could easily become anger if I wasn't careful. "Mama's recipe for pastel de papas hasn't changed since her abuela came from Salta. That's—" He interrupted, "You lack ambition, senor. It is not enough to be nostalgic. You are not offering this university anything new." My jaw locked, they stared, waiting for my embarrassment, but I let the silence stretch. If I tried to defend myself, words would splinter. I couldn't afford for my temper to cost me more. The third professor finally spoke, her accent sharp, voice bored. "We cannot accept your application. If you wish to be a cook, there are restaurants in Palermo. But this school has standards." I stood, the chair's creak made them all flinch. "Thank you for your consideration," I said, hearing the steel in my own voice. They barely nodded. I don't remember walking down the hallway. I remember the taste of iron in my mouth, my tongue bitten through. Sunlight pooled at the end of the corridor, and when it struck my face, I almost laughed, the entire world vibrating with held-in fury. Outside, Buenos Aires was already gleaming with heat, the streets tangled with taxis honking and old women hawking fruit. I took the bus home to our neighborhood, my knuckles cracking inside my fists. The house was cramped, walls yellowed, kitchen smelling of onion and old grease. Mama stood at the stove, stirring a pot. My sister Lucia hovered at her elbow, her laughter as clear as bells. Mama glanced at my face and wiped her hands on a towel. "How did it go?" I shook my head. She nodded as if she'd expected as much. "No matter, they do not understand our ways." Quiet, but her lips thinned. Lucia's face turned wary. Pappy rumbled down the stairs, radio tucked under his arm. He picked up on the tension immediately. "Well, what did the fancy school say?" "They said no. It wasn't what they wanted." I tried to make it sound like a joke, but it only made Pappy's mouth twist. "Waste of time," he grumbled. "They want inventors, not cooks. You could work at Café El Mundo like your cousin." "Decent tips." Lucia shot me a nervous glance. She knew I hated that suggestion. I sat at the kitchen table fuming. Mama ladled steaming stew into chipped bowls. Across from me, Pappy flicked on the radio, as if ending the conversation. Later, when the story filtered through the family to Tia Felisa, to Uncle Mario at the butcher's, to the nosy neighbors whose sons drove taxis, it grew sharper, meaner in the telling. "Julio wants to be a chef," they sneered at markets, seeing me with Mama. But the university said no, he cooks peasant food. What's next? Chips and mate as haute cuisine. Their laughter followed me through the barrio, bright as glass shards. At night I lay on my mattress in the small back room, listening to the city through thin walls, to the distant mournful tango, the bark of a street dog. I felt the rage sandwiched between shame and bone. I couldn't sleep for it, couldn't shed it, could only wait for morning. Days bled into each other. I worked at the Bodgon near Plaza Italia, hands raw from peeling potatoes and scrubbing pans, hiding bruises and ambition. Don Ernesto, the owner, let me cook sometimes simple things, milanza or fideos. No one cared if the tomatoes were diced just so, or if the oregano was fresh. The waiters barked orders, the old men at tables cursed the heat. No one noticed Julio Romero, university reject, but I remembered every Sunday in Mama's kitchen slicing onions until my eyes streamed. I remembered what home tasted like: fat, acidic, tender, bitter. Our food was memory. The anger, at least, had become familiar. I wielded it like a knife, slicing carrots with precision, until one night Ernesto patted my back after a shift. "You are quick. You could go somewhere, Chico. Just not here." That night I laid in bed and imagined places I'd never been. I dreamed of Paris, of enormous spotless kitchens, of chefs with names sharp as their knives. Buenos Aires was bursting, but I was invisible here. One sticky summer night, Lucia clattered into my room, eyes bright. They're doing tryouts at the new place, that posh hotel, big kitchen, foreigners, everything. I almost told her not to bother, but she sat at the foot of my bed, legs curled beneath her. You'll regret it if you don't. Even Pappy said maybe you should try. She looked down, shy. So I went cutting through Palermo under trees heavy with jacaranda blooms, dress shoes borrowed from Pappy, and a resume tidy with lies. The kitchen buzzed, copper pans, white coats, French spoken between muttered curses. I cooked a simple dish, humita enchala, creamed corn in husks with a trickle of spicy sauce. I plated it quieter than my heartbeat, and the head chef tasted it, licked his lips, and called the sous chef over. Who taught you this? My mama, I said. They frowned but took my number. That first job was torture and hunger. I worked split shifts under flaring tempers. The other cooks called me provinciano and mocked my accent, my recipes. It didn't matter. I paid rent on a smaller room, sent money home, saw Lucia sometimes when she snuck into the city. Pappy preferred me to stay away, worried I'd shame him further. But I worked and learned and gathered secrets. Which butcher smiled if you tipped, which spice vendor would trade for old wine, which dishwashers knew the city's true heartbeats. 2 years passed, I grew calluses, and one night my boss, Chef Laurent, who could spend an hour on a single sauce, called me into his office after service. We're opening a bistro. I need someone who knows Argentine food. Modern, ambitious, not tired, you want ins. I said yes so fast it startled him. The years crushed together after that. Early mornings, bleary-eyed at the downtown Mercado, hauling crates of peppers and beef, planning menus. Learning to taste, to trust my instincts, the pinch of pimenton in locro, the acid in a simple chimichurri. Use what you know, Laurent would growl. Make them remember home. I poured myself into my work, never letting myself forget those committee faces. Rage had become a shield, now it was the blade. I cooked with the memory of each snide remark, each sideways glance at the neighborhood grocer, each well-meaning family member who said, maybe Julio should consider mechanic school. The bistro was something different. The city's food critics came, teased by whispers of the peasant chef. The lines grew longer. GQ and Clarin both ran profiles. My name in print felt unreal at first. Mama cut the articles out, pressed them into a folder. Lucia, now at university herself, bragged to anyone who'd listen. Sometimes, late at night after service ended, and the city's humid tongue finally cooled, I'd catch sight of my face in the kitchen window, hair matted, eyes exhausted but lit from within. I'd remember that first committee. You lack ambition, they'd said. I cooked with the kind of ambition they'd never understand. The bistro became a fixture, then a sensation. I saved every peso, and after 3 years bought a sliver of a lot in Villa Crespo. A corner storefront, battered green shutters and cracked tile floors. I scrubbed it myself, hands rough with bleach, and painted the windows a hopeful blue. Over the course of a chokingly humid autumn, with Lucia and Mama and a few loyal friends, we built a kitchen for us, for the kind of food that didn't apologize. I called it Comedor Romero. I poured everything into that opening. The first menu was simple, empanadas, guiso, milanesa, flans smothered in dulce de leche, but every plate was perfection. News spread on Facebook before we even opened, the neighborhood whispered, then gossiped, and a line formed an hour before the doors ever split apart. I cooked, and I tasted, and I forced myself to keep the rage as a steady hand behind my passion, not its master. Critics came and went away shocked. I watched their faces when they ate the pastel de papas, when they scraped sauces from plates with torn hunks of bread. The food was peasant food, yes, but in their eyes it became something sacred. I slept barely 5 hours a night, refusing to let satisfaction dull the sharpness I'd clung to for so long. The old house finally transformed too. Pappy quit mentioning Café El Mundo. Mama glowed, a little less tired. Lucia, nearly finished with school, began bringing friends to dinner. 3 years after opening Comedor Romero, the Alumni Association of that very university sent a letter, polite, distant, beckoning. They wanted alumni to engage with the culinary students, to share your story of perseverance. They pretended to forget I had never technically been admitted. I agreed on one condition, that the event be hosted at my restaurant. The morning of, I woke before dawn. The city was cool for once, fog twisting between the lamp posts. The kitchen was already humming, my new sous chef stirring onions, Lucia laying out linen napkins with jittery pride. At 10 sharp they arrived, two women and the same white-bearded professor from my rejection. He looked older, but his eyes were just as cautious. Students in stiff uniforms trailed behind them, nervous, expectant. He shook my hand with a perfectly neutral smile. I took them on a tour. The kitchen gleamed, copper pans, tidy worktops, steam hissing with each expertly plated order. My cooks were a mix of old neighbors, a few Argentines returned from Spain, one Bolivian girl who could dice onions faster than anyone I'd ever met. They glanced up at the visitors, then went back to their work, unconcerned. This was our realm. We sat in the main dining room, sunlight pooling in sharp stripes across the floor. Plates arrived, humita in delicate corn husks, milenza with pickled radish, empanadas arranged in perfect half-moons. Each bite was my grandmother's legacy, but sharper, clearer, more honest than the food had ever been allowed to be. The committee sampled in polite silence, their faces betraying nothing at first. Then I saw the professor, eyes closing around the spoonful of locro, as if hearing some echo from his own past. The same woman who once called my cooking nostalgic dabbed her mouth, surprised. The students, noisier, nudged each other with hidden smiles. Finally, the professor set down his fork, folded his napkin, and spoke to the room. "Señor Romero," he said, slower than before, "I have never understood Argentine cuisine until today." He looked down, then up again. "I was wrong, años atrás. You have given us back something we lost." There were no apologies, I didn't need them. My staff brought out flan for dessert, creamy and trembling. The students snapped photos for Instagram, all pretense dropping away. Afterwards, as the students milled around for autographs, Lucia hugged me in the kitchen. Mama stood at the pass, her arms crossed, refusing to let tears show. Papi came in late, hat in his hands. He looked at the crowd, then at me, pride mingling with humility. "You did good, son," he said, and that alone nearly undid me. The rage had faded now, stripped away by years of discipline and flame. What remained was a tenderness I had refused to admit I needed, respect earned and given, solid as bread. The old professor lingered as the others left. He took my hand with both of his. "You are a chef, Señor Romero, not just a cook." As they filed out and the evening light swept low over the tables laid with fresh napkins and chipped glasses, I felt the city pulse through me, the years of hunger, the sharp sting of mockery, the 10,000 meals that had stitched my world together. I washed my hands, slipped back into the kitchen and began again. My anger had served its purpose. What remained was more valuable, the patient, unshowy certainty that I belonged and the knowledge that with every plate I could remake the world in our image, on our terms. Outside, Buenos Aires sang its eternal songs, and for the first time I heard them not as a rebuke but as welcome.